You might think that when you receive app designs, you can just start implementing them, right? But there's a lot more to it. Let's see how we can get the most out of a briefing with the designer. So you might wonder, is the design the law? Is it like exactly what we have to create? And it may sound silly because we get the designs to implement, but really think about it. Like, what is a design really? Let's get philosophical for a second. If a designer has their design and presses right click and say, make fully functional app, well, then they would, right? Like, they wouldn't need us. Maybe something with AI we could solve. Or if a designer could just say it in text, like, I want an app for a mayonnaise web store with a list of products and a buy button at the bottom. Well, if all they have to do is say the specifications, and if that would be enough, then that's good enough, right? They show what we want to ship, but we're not actually shipping the images. So there is a gap between what a designer has in mind and what we as developers are actually implementing. And it's kind of the goal to see how we can close this gap and make sure that what we implement and ship is actually really close to the vision of the designer. A design really is a communication tool. A design is not a complete picture either, right? Because they don't know all the technical specifications. They may not always know which components are available, which components we are using, which components are customizable, and in what way. Do we need to reinvent some wheels or not? Receiving a design and fully implementing it as is doesn't always make a lot of sense, right? There is some leeway there. So let's see what we can do here. So the first thing I would do is find ways where you can save time. Not just to cut corners, but to actually be able to ship a feature faster, which is also in the benefit of a designer or the entire company. For example, take this feature here. This is an example from the Mobile System Design book, where a student connects with the tutor. Now, as you can see, there's a to-do list, there's a callout with positive reinforcement, there's a schedule. At the top, there's a bar where a student can switch between multiple tutors. Now, this component took me about 5 minutes to design, and yes, maybe it shows, but the point is, it takes a lot more work to implement. For example, if you want to be able to switch between tutors, now we have to support a multi-tutor system. We need to also build it for the backend as well as the frontend. Things need to sync up. Maybe there is more logic related to adding more tutors. So a little component like this can have big implications. So what we can do here is to think about it. Like, if we're building this from scratch, like, do we need to support multiple tutors straight from the first version? And we can negotiate here, right? We can decide as a team with the designer, okay, we will support multiple tutors, just not the first release, right? Because even if it is super important, we will still need to support a single screen anyway, so why not build that anyway? And then we add the components shortly after. So as a developer, we can be open and transparent about this with the designer. We can say, yes, we will support multiple tutors, it's a great feature, but we will have to start with one anyway. Another way to save time is to see which components you receive and cross-check them with the components we have available. Now, there may be some native components you can use, right? Like, for example, switches and toggles and that kind of thing. But sometimes there are components already made in the company. So if a designer comes up with a new type of component, instead of jumping straight to the code editor and start implementing a new component, just check which components are available. A simple message in your group chat is all it takes. Does something like this already exist? Well, if the answer is yes, or something that's sort of close, well, it may make sense to go back to the designer and be like, look, I know you came up with this cool component, but we have something that's like 85% the same. If we use this 85% the same component, maybe with a little customization, then we can solve the same problem and I don't need to re-implement an entirely new component. If a discussion like this can save us a ton of time, right? To reuse what we have, because a designer does not know everything that's available. Another thing that's important when receiving a design is to really figure out what are the hidden requirements. Like, let's take a look at the design again. We see that there are some list of to-do items, right? Well, what if the requirement is that the to-do items need to load quickly or with a poor internet connection? Well, that just takes me 2 seconds to say in English, but to build it takes a lot more time, right? It could be a simple specification. It needs to load quickly. But the reality is we now probably need to think about local storage, local caching, offline mode in the app, maybe background syncing with the backend. So it's important to really figure out, okay, when I see a screen, when I receive a design, what are the requirements that are not known yet? And try to uncover them. Another way to find hidden requirements is to try and break the design. So let's take a look at the screen again. We see that all the views are nicely populated, right? We have a callout message here, we have a to-do list, everything is nicely filled. And usually when you receive a design, you get kind of like an ideal situation type of design, right? Everything is just neatly filled with lorem ipsum or other text and whatnot. But in reality, this is rarely the case, right? This screen is filled with content from the users themselves. So something we do not really control. Now users, or people, I should say, really fill up screens however they want, right? So they may use a low resolution image, they may just not fill any content at all. Like what if there is no to-do list yet? What if the cutout is just empty? And what if there's no schedule, but we just have an empty screen? Like you got to think about this. And if you don't receive this in the design, it's a good moment to think about, okay, what if this screen is completely empty or mostly empty? How would that look? Because maybe a designer can actually give you a version of that screen and actually realize that the design just breaks, like it just doesn't hold up. So perhaps that results in another version of this screen, like a sort of empty version of a screen, or maybe where the components are just empty. For example, this component with the to-do items here may have a separate state for when it's empty. It may maybe have a custom text such as the tutor hasn't set up a schedule for you yet or something, right? So it's just good to think about like how would it break. Another way to think about how screens break is to go to the opposite spectrum, where you think about if there's too much content, right? Or if the screen or the device is just too small. For example, what if this callout message is just huge, right? What if it is like, 500 lines? Someone just posts a whole thesis in there. Well, you may have to think about it, like maybe it cuts off after 4 lines, maybe it just doesn't stretch, or it stretches a bit first, and then there's a sort of ellipsis to cut off the rest, and maybe there will be a little more button. Try to get creative about using the screen, the design, right? For example, you may press the little cross button on the callout. Okay, the callout disappears, right? That's probably expected, but does it mean it's gone forever? Is there a different state where you can get the callout back? And what if there's no schedule set and I want to join? Do I get an error? And what about errors anyway? Are they just simple alerts, which is kind of not the nicest way to show errors? Or maybe we can think about inline errors. Really think about how you would use the screen and talk with the designer about sort of the missing states that are not yet in the design, because then they can already get to work and come up with more states that you need while you're implementing the actual screen. And there are more like functional requirements that are not clear yet. For example, if I press this reset button, will everything just reset or do I get an alert? What about the schedule? Like, does this schedule auto reset itself? Is there like a maybe backend powered scheduling system, or is there something you just need to figure out locally? With a little imagination, you can really figure out like how this scheme will work, what is missing, which states are missing, which requirements are hidden, and just you can get a lot more out of it. Let's talk about Pixel Perfect. I think Pixel Perfect is more of a thing from the old days. It's not a mono thing anymore. And what do I mean by that? So in the past, we would just have one font size, for at least for iOS, no tablets, and that was kind of it, right? We would maybe have more trouble with memory management and that kind of stuff for those that remember. But it was a lot easier to make things pixel perfect, right? So we would 9-slice rounded rectangles. So for example, we would take a button with a shadow as an image and isolate the corners, and then we could stretch out the horizontal and vertical areas of the button to grow and shrink it as needed. But nowadays, we don't really work that way anymore, right? We have so many screen sizes. It's really dynamic now. We have right to left support. We have various font size support, dark mode support. So those are just a few. And a designer will not design, 500 variations for you with all the font sizes times all the devices times landscape mode times portrait mode times tablets. The design tools actually assist in this, where they can show multiple sizes and the designer can make variations with dark mode and light mode. But the problem still is you have a lot more variations, right? Like if I have a phone with a large font size with right to left text, it's already a way different design than the tiniest font size in dark mode on an iPad or tablet. So it doesn't make sense if all these designs pre-designed for you, right? So when we talk about Pixel Perfect, we have to get as close to the design as possible. So yes, we use the correct colors, we use the correct border widths, we try to get the rounded corners exactly the same size. But even things like shadows are already different, right? How a shadow is rendered in Figma is different than in code, right? We don't embed shadows in PNGs anymore, like with the 9-slice example. So if we define a shadow in code, we can try and get it really close, but it will never be 100% exactly the same as the design, unless we actually embed the design as PNGs, which we should not do anymore. Or let's take large text sizes. Maybe the designer hasn't made a special design for large text sizes. That's okay. You can enable large text sizes, show to the designer and see if the design breaks or if it needs to be adjusted a little bit. So the idea is that the designer just signs off on things that are variations. And that's why I don't like to think in terms of pixel perfect. I think we should think in terms of keeping the design in mind where we can and try and support a lot of variations. Another tip I want to give is think in terms of time investment as opposed to worth implementing versus not worth implementing. For example, you may be asked to build a custom navigation bar. As a developer, that kind of is a problem, right? It's really difficult to come up with the whole custom navigation bar. I mean, you can customize a navigation bar a little, but you cannot completely reinvent one. So it might be tempting to talk in terms of, well, we should not do this, we should do that. But it kind of can make you look like a rigid developer. Instead, what I recommend doing is think about terms of time investment, right? Maybe to this company, a custom navigation bar is crucial, super important for their branding. So instead, make it a team decision, right? You can still raise your concerns like, hey, we should not do this, but if it's really important, we can do it. It's just going to take like weeks and weeks to implement it. But as the team, actually it might make sense, right? They may say, well, it's worth to it so much, we should just do it anyway. Well, then you're not at least rigid, right? You're not deciding solely like we're not going to implement this. You actually make it a team decision. And the next tip I want to talk about is about giving feedback. Now, as a developer, we get feedback a lot, right? The compiler complains about all the code we wrote wrong. Then we have a code review, and then all the coworkers tell us what we did wrong and all the bugs that we may create. Then we hand it off to the product owners and all the team members, and then they give their opinions about your work. So we're kind of more battle-hardened to receive feedback and criticism about our code a lot. But a designer has a different experience, right? They would give a design and then the entire company has an opinion about their work, not just the developers. So it's much more frustrating to really hear about all the things that should be changed and different. So I recommend to keep that in mind, right? Don't just say the things that don't work, actually compliment their designs and honestly compliment them. Because often designs are really cool and I think it's a fun thing to implement. And the last tip I want to give is that a designer is your ally, right? It's not your nemesis that comes up with difficult components for you to make. The design is a conversation piece for you both to figure out what to make first, how to make it best. And so together you can come up with the best implementation possible. I hope you found these tips very valuable. You can learn more by going to mobilesystemdesign.com and check out the Mobile System Design book, or you can read articles at swiftinDepth.com. Thanks for watching.